I love waving, honest to goodness.
Yes. If I stopped, would anybody notice? I'm delighted that wasn't a much longer song because I was getting roasted at that fire.
They are sad stories
Yeah.
until we find them. There's people out there that don't know that they have an old tree.
Seriously.
And it's probably in their granny's orchard.
Shade and shelter.
Shade and shelter.
Right,
It
right.
makes for a more happy sheep.
Of course. Yeah, yeah. Well, they sound yummy, don't they?
They sound it.
I will put on you the greatest compliment I ever made. That is to profess sincerely that I never found anything wrong with your house. So wrote Dean Jonathan Swift to his friend Mr. Robert Cope in the month of May 1723. And if the praise seems somewhat less than effusive, then you have to remember that the waspish Dean was a very hard man to please. The house in which he never found anything wrong is no longer here. But the compliment lives on in the hearts and minds of the people who take such pride in the appearance of the place and in their reputation for hospitality. Welcome to LOUGHALL, in the county of Armagh in apple blossom time. It's easier to take pride in your appearance when you start off with the advantages of LOUGHALL. And maybe it's easier to be tidy when so much of your energies have for generations been concerned with the neat alignment of orchard rows. Apple trees not only provide apples, they also provide the pretty, frilly pink and white flowers that somehow make you want to clean around them. The apple is king here. It's the source of wealth and well-being, and so it's fitting that the Department of Agriculture boffins have come here to pay homage to the apple, to study its ways, its seed, breed and generation, and to pass on new apple knowledge to those who already know so much. LOUGHALL is one big agricultural testing ground, the place where cutting-edge technology meets traditional farming, and the two try to see eye to eye. You could say that the agricultural centre now dominates LOUGHALL in the way that the Cope family once held sway. As landlords went, the Copes appear to have been better than most, concerned as they were with the education and welfare of their tenantry by all accounts. Pat Riley and her husband Ronnie both taught at one of the numerous schools built hereabouts by the Cope family. But while Ronnie's a bit of a blue one, Pat actually grew up in the grounds of one of the Cope's stately homes.
I was born here, I went to school here, I did my teaching practice here, I taught here most of my life. I always say that I didn't get anywhere in life.
You were born here and you're still here, more or
Well,
less.
but if you get it right first time,
Yes.
why should you change?
Do you think you got it right first time?
Yes,
It must have been lovely growing up here.
It was nice growing up here. We walked most places, we walked through the Dramilly estate.
Yeah.
And
To school.
walked to school every day, and walked to church, walked to choir practice, walked everywhere.
So you were fit anyway for a start off because
Well-
you're talking about quite some wee distance really in these
Well, yes,
instances,
I
really, aren't
suppose
you?
it was quite a distance, but you were used to it.
So you actually grew up on the estate itself. Would that have been one of the Cope family's houses
Yes,
originally? Yes.
Yes, my family reputedly came over sometime in the 1700s as weavers
And lived on
and
the.
they were tenant farmers.
Yes.
And early in the 1900s, all the tenant farmers around here had the opportunity of buying their land back, and we find letters in the Cope estate papers about the land being chained.
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 Yes.
For
Do you know
measuring.
what a chain?
Oh, measured. Was that
Yes.
the
Measured
old-fashioned
chain. The land was
chains?
chained,
I see.
yes.
Right.
And in some cases, the man in the big house thought that the farm was bigger than the farmer who lived on it.
I see. Right.
So you
right.
maybe got a letter which said,
Yeah.
my farm has been chained twice already and it won't be chained anymore.
I see. Right.
I think the local schoolmaster got the job of chaining.
Of chaining.
It was reckoned he'd be an impartial chainer.
I see. I never heard that expression used before. Now,
It's just one way of raising your income, you see. If a man had 30 acres
and you thought he had 35. Like, if you could put it up a wee bit, you could get a bit more rent.
Naturally, yes. So there were disputes arose as a result of it.
Well, there were instances. I don't know that there were a great many, but there were instances.
But I think by that time, when they started to buy out their properties, they felt they had more ownership
Of course.
as they gradually came into it, and therefore they got more courage
I see.
to challenge
Yes.
authority.
So the actual authority of the estate was dwindling all of the time
Yes,
as the land was
yes.
dwindling. Is that the idea?
Early in 100 years before, you wouldn't have found a farmer sort of writing to the big house.
No,
Wouldn't have had the temerity.
They wouldn't have
no.
cared.
But
Do
then,
you, do you know what a chain is?
well, I presume it's a length. Is it?
4.5 yards, one perch, pole or rod.
Yes.
5 perches, 1 chain. 10 chains, 1 furlong. 8 furlongs, 1 mile.
1 mile.
it was
This is-
22 yards was a chain.
See, I knew that, but I didn't like to show off because.
The truth is, of course, that I'm actually too young to have used such measurements at school, but I'm also too gallant to admit it. But Pat's affinity with the estate and its history is remarkably strong. She's able to quote anecdotes from the last few centuries and make it sound as if she's talking about recent family history. She and Ronnie both can talk about Jonathan Swift, a regular visitor who came for a week and usually stayed a fortnight, as if they'd met him personally.
The original manor house must have been the one where Swift stayed must have been much grander and much bigger.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he eulogises it and the family. He writes things like, he wrote to another friend and he said, "I've just been staying with your old friend, Mr. Cope." And he said, who is the most domestic man you ever saw, with a wife whom he is so silly as to love, and who deserves it as well as a wife can.
I see.
And 9 children with whom he troubles himself as much as possible and his friends as little as possible.
You almost let her off my heart almost.
Well, I like the old English, the sort of formal way.
You've been trying to get Ronnie to take some of these habits up. You know, Mr. Cope was a perfect gentleman, Ronnie.
Well, I do wash the dishes.
You're domesticated as well.
Yes.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Well, that looks absolutely beautiful today, isn't it? Looking
Yes.
out there over that.
Not only beautiful, but nowadays functional as well. I imagine, perhaps naively, that Swift and his friend Mr. Cope would fully approve of the improvements that this estate has ushered into the horticultural world as a result of the studies done by scientists like Francis Ward and Sean McAteer. Here in the walled garden, once the hothouse of the Cope estate, Francis and Sean are assembling what has to be, when it's finished, an absolutely priceless collection.
With the Bramley coming in just over 100 years ago, it became the principal apple variety.
The Bramley's the cooking apple.
That's the one we have now.
Right.
So most of these varieties would have been lost.
You're right.
There's a few of them, there's only a single tree left
Of one particular kind of species.
of one, like seedling over there.
Yeah.
There was only one left, and now we've got a cutting of that.
Right.
So it's building up those stocks to make sure the heritage keeps going.
So do you mean if that tree had been destroyed, that would have been that particular apple
I
could be
think
extinct?
the day
Yeah.
after that scion was taken, so
Right.
that more could be propagated from it,
Yeah.
the tree blew down.
The tree blew down. And that would have been it gone forever.
That would have been it finished.
So you can begin to see the importance of the heritage orchard. Some of these are literally irreplaceable. If you think that's an exaggeration, you only have to remember that in the pre-Bramley days there were thousands, yes, thousands of varieties of apples in Ireland. Now, even the heritage orchard will have only about 120 when it's completed.
There's a few stakes here with no trees against them.
This is what we're looking
Are
we're
these
looking-
sad stories, or are they about to be?
They are sad stories
Yeah.
until we find them. There's people out there that don't know that they have an old tree.
Seriously?
And it's probably in their granny's orchard.
Right.
And what we would like is for people to actually give us in apples at harvest
Yeah.
to see if they have something special.
So you're saying at one stage in Ireland there were thousands of different kinds of varieties of apples?
Yes.
Right? And they all became under threat, as it were? Yeah?
Yeah,
Whenever the Bramley came in.
Yeah, basically, this is an indication of globalization and the degeneration of variety in farming,
I see.
where you become more and more focused on single crops that are generating the profit for the growers. And if you take the Bramley, for example, it was the best cooker
Yeah.
up until the 1920s. And then the disease, the apple scab disease, mutated and was able to get round the Bramley's defences.
I see.
So from that day forth, the Bramley has had to be continuously sprayed with pesticides. Now, one of the reasons we are doing this is that by getting this collection together again, we can now look for natural disease resistance in the old varieties, which was why they survived in years gone by. The other issue is that each apple cultivar would have been selected according to its ability to grow under the local environment. So you would have had apples suitable for Donegal, you would have apples suitable for Fermanagh, Antrim and so on.
Would they be that particular to each place, yes?
Through selection and through hundreds of years, people would have developed a pool of cultivars for their particular area. So if you actually look at some of these trees, you'll see some of them are already in flower.
Yeah.
Some of them are still very closed and no sign of any leaf. So that would be, for example, the early flowering ones would do well in a warm climate or a warm environment.
Right.
The later ones are protecting themselves against late spring frosts.
So they're expecting to be a bit colder.
So they would do much better they would survive in high altitude or higher up areas
Yes.
with rougher environments than those that you would see now currently in bloom.
Well, tell me this, because this is the other thing that I find really strange about this part of Armagh. Everywhere you look, every wee field and drumline absolutely covered in orchards. Why is this the orchard county? I mean, why is this so suitable for apple growing? Or is it just the fact that people up here like apples or what?
There's a lot of history behind apple growing in this area. There was, for example, in the Four Masters, a description of a wake in the 11th century whereby the cider was of such high quality that the wake lasted much longer than was normal. So it goes back through time.
Yeah.
Apples were grown throughout Ireland, and the apple was one of the special trees under the ancient laws. But through time, the area has constricted, and this area has the microclimate of Lough Neagh around it, and it has the research facility in the centre of it.
I see.
And that's the only combination left on the island.
So it's a mixture of kind of tradition, coincidence, and the right kind of climate. In other words, you could grow these apples in another county, or you could have the same concentration of apple growth.
Oh yeah, you'll
Yes,
have their own
yes.
particular variety for their own location.
Right, right.
The Bramley was actually introduced to Northern Ireland. The man out the road at Crannagill, he brought in 60 in 1951, I think it was, Sean, wasn't it?
Right then.
And that's what started the Bramley in here.
So the Bramley and I arrived at the same year, would you believe,
Did
in
you?
this country? Yes, we did. I know it's hard to believe looking at me now.
Apart from our joint arrival in this country, the Bramley and I don't have that much in common. For a start, I don't get so much scab and therefore require less spraying than the Bramley. And my commercial value is negligible compared to the Bramley, which represents some 95% of the entire commercial crop grown here. You can begin to see why it's kind of reassuring that people like Francis and Sean are investigating alternative varieties.
In my mind's eye, this is the kind of typical orchard scene I've always imagined. Gnarled old apple trees, surrounded by birdsong and covered in May blossom, with branches high enough to walk under and strong enough to support the ladders that will be eventually needed to harvest the fruit come the autumn time. But I suspect that this idyllic picture may soon become a thing of the past, because these old apple orchards will shortly have to give way to the M9 and the M27. No, the M9 and the M27 are not new motorways that are going to plough through the orchards. They refer to a modern compact rootstock onto which the cultivars, the fruiting part of the tree, are grafted. Now, these have a dwarfing effect, that is, the roots stay small and the height and spread of the branches stay small. And the benefit to the apple grower is that he can plant 4 times as many trees, get nearly twice the yield of apples, and he doesn't need a ladder to reach them. The only disadvantage is that unless you're very, very small, you won't be able to walk onto the branches.
But it's not only apples and apple trees that exercise the brains of the Loughgall boffins. They also grow trees here whose branches they insist must be walked under. This is unusual picture number 1. Have you spotted what's unusual? If not, Jim McAdam will explain. And Jim McAdam himself is actually unusual picture number 2. Why? Because he's carrying a hurley stick. Why? Well, I didn't like to ask, until I knew the answer, if you know what I mean. Anyway, back to the trees and the sheep.
What you're looking at is a whole series of trials, and the whole objective behind them is to try and get trees onto farms, looking at different ways from the ordinary conventional farm woodlands of trying to encourage farmers to plant trees.
We don't have a lot of trees on our land, generally speaking. We're
We
pretty
don't.
low for that, aren't we?
We're the lowest in Europe, in fact, in tree cover, only 6% or something,
Yeah.
less than a quarter of the average in Europe. So one of the problems is small farms, people are reluctant to take land out of their farm to plant trees on it.
So the idea in the past has been that if you plant trees on it, well, it's not really any good for anything else. That's been the conventional wisdom? Is that what you're saying?
That's been the conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
Trees have gone on areas of the farm that people can't use, or else farms that people are not really wanting to make a full-time income off, maybe.
Sure,
So
sure.
what we've tried to look at here is ways of where you can plant trees but continue to farm.
I see.
In other words, here, if you look here, what we have is trees at wide spacings. And right since the day we planted these trees, we've been grazing sheep in them.
I see.
These were planted 15 years ago, these ash. And we've had sheep in here since the day we planted the trees.
So the sheep are used to the trees, obviously. And hence these here, of course, these to protect the bark from the sheep. Is that the idea?
That's our problem, is the cost of establishing it. You have to put the trees in a tube to get them up a bit,
Yes.
and then stop them from grazing the bark.
Right.
But after that, once they get going, it creates what I think is a very pleasant landscape.
Well, it's a lovely space. If you want my honest opinion, the trees are kind of very, very regularly spaced. Is that essential as well? I mean, is that part of the plan, or is that just the way you planted them?
No, it's not. See, what comes back, the problem is this is a trial, it's an experiment, so we have to have everything sort of regulated. But in real life, you wouldn't have to do this. For example, you could plant your trees in contours around the side of the hill. You could put a mixture of trees in, different sorts, and that's what we've done down there. Or you could put trees in different years, so that some trees were big and some were small. So you could look at this variation.
And these are all ash trees, by the way.
These are all ash.
And this is why, in case anybody was wondering why you're carrying the hurley
I'm
stick.
carrying the stick, yes.
This is actually some of your own produce from one of these trees.
And this year, for the first, we didn't know how well these trees would grow at this wide spacing, because the conventional wisdom is you grow trees close together and they grow at a certain rate, and then you harvest them after 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
But these ash were in 15 years, and a boy visited them and said, look, those are at Hurley standard already. Just across here you can see where we removed one of those trees. Now, one of the things, apparently, I'm not an expert about growing trees for Hurley, is you need to get the whole very base of the tree where it sweeps down, so that you get this sweep in the base of the stick. So here's a stump that's been removed, and it's a specialist job, but the point too is it makes it worth about 30 or 40 times as much as firewood. So you can cut 6 or 8 Hurley sticks out of the base of one of those trees, and this exact stick came from
this
one
tree
of
here?
these trees here.
From one of these, you can't say exactly which one. Well, that grain, as far as I know, and I'm no expert in hurley sticks either, that grain is perfect for the shape of the hurley, because it actually follows that shape and bends exactly where you'd wish it to do so.
That's right, and I believe from talking to the people that growing the trees at this spacing, they grew fast and they grew springy. Because, as you say, the grain is wide apart. There's more spring in the stick than if the trees were growing close together.
I see, right.
So
if I could play hurling, I would be pretty good using this stick.
I'd be good. You would have a good stick there.
Right.
Unfortunately, it takes a bit more than a good stick to make a good player. You could spend a long and fascinating time with Jim McAdam and the other pioneers of Loughgall, and I did. One of the things that draws me to this place is the patience that's required for experiments to deliver results. Patient time in which ideas are kicked around and imaginations are prompted to ask, what if? Here you can see where they're trying to grow trees far enough apart to allow farm machinery in to grow crops. And here they're experimenting with the most fundamental crop of all, grass. As many varieties of grass as there are shades of green. Fast-growing, slow-growing, growing in shade, grass for silage, grass for grazing, grass, and I didn't know this before, for exporting all over the world where Ulster grass seed is highly prized. Alongside the cutting-edge modernity of this pastoral scene is the centuries-old scene of 2 men dabbing a bit of lime wash on a thatched cottage. Perhaps the scene has a bit of symbolic value, because this isn't just any thatched cottage. This is Dan Winter's cottage at the Diamond Crossroads near Loughgall, historic site of the clash between the Protestant People Day Boys and the Catholic Defenders back in 1795, after which the Orange Society, later to become the Orange Order, was formed. Colin Winter is a direct descendant of Dan Winter and grew up, like generations before him, in the cottage. Nowadays, Colin wants the cottage to be a centre wherein are preserved crafts and practices to be enjoyed by all traditions. Is this possible? Well, with people like Colin, all things are possible, I think.
We're reckoning it's the longest thatched cottage now.
The longest thatched cottage.
Roughly 94 feet long.
Right, right.
We don't know of any other ones as long as it.
As soon as you say that, of course, a lot of people are going to say, anybody say my cottage is even
Exactly.
longer
I
than
know,
yours.
I know.
more or less.
It'll always with somebody have some.
Yeah, but it is a very long cottage, and was built way back in the 1730s or something.
It was
like
built
that.
in 1730, so it was.
And a lot of what we're seeing here now at the moment is the original cottage.
It's all. It's nearly about 80% of it. 80% of it will be original.
That's obviously original. The roof
Yeah,
and so
the roof
on.
and all is original.
Right,
just about.
right, okay. And the doors, because I've already had experience at walking through this door, and I'm not all that tall, but it nearly took the top of my head off. It must be dangerous for a man of your size.
It is.
coming
Well,
through.
whenever you're living in the house all the time, you remember the doors. But whenever I got married and moved out of the house, whenever I come in the other time, I'd still hit my head on it. It's
Yeah.
very sore.
Yeah,
see
you
those
just,
stories.
just do it once each day, don't you? And
Well,
then you-
once a
and
day I
then you-
would
then you watch it after
remind
that.
you about it. So
This is absolutely wonderful here. This is the original floor, I presume, as well. Everything, is it?
no, the original floor in this house would have actually been mud.
And the walls are made of mud as well.
The walls is all mud, and when you walk through the house, you'll see a wee square pane of glass.
Well, this is you've left this so we can see what
yes.
it's like inside.
It's just to give people an idea what actually a mud wall is.
Right, right.
Basically, it's mud, and it's mixed with straw and horsehair to sort of knit it all together. And they would have started off about 3 foot on the ground,
Yeah.
and they kept tapering up and up and up as they go along.
And they literally
eventually
just
got-
slapped mud on. It wouldn't have been mud blocks or anything.
Well,
like
some of it could have been mud blocks, but it's really just mud, mud mixed up into like a sort of a soft compound, and just slapped it on.
Right.
And it had built so much, and then went on till an hour wall, and built while that bit was dry, and build an hour wall, and just
Right.
keep building up and up.
And mud would have been used because presumably they didn't have enough stone to build. Would that be the
Well,
case?
this part, every part of the country had different materials. This part of the country, it's heavy clay ground. If you go to like a Mourne Mountains or something, it's all stone. There's loads of stones about
Yes,
there.
of course, right,
It's
yeah.
all wee stone cottages.
Yeah.
But a lot of around this part of the country, it would be nearly all mud wall.
So it would have been,
cottages.
the mud would have been particularly, useful for that purpose.
Even the mud, see in the summertime, a real roasting day in the summertime. You come into this house and it's like air conditioning in it.
It's cool.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And in the winter time,
Right.
it's vice versa. It is.
It keeps the heat in.
It keeps the heat in.
I
So it
see.
is. So
I mean,
they're
look,
pretty
look,
smart
look
people.
at the thickness. There's what 2.5, maybe
2.5
3
to
feet.
3
And some of
foot
the outer
in some of
walls
the
are
walls.
even
Yes.
thicker than that. So an awful lot of mud. Were there disadvantages to that? I mean, was it inclined to dry out too much at times, or?
Whenever we were doing the house up, we weren't allowed to put any underfloor heating or nothing in it, because the house has to keep a certain amount of dampage in it, in the mud walls, to keep the mud walls standing.
I see. Right. So it could dry out. In other words,
It could dry out,
start
yes.
flaking off. Or
Well, no, if it dried out, it just collapse.
Really?
So it would, yeah.
Right.
You have to have a certain amount of dampage to keep the mud walls.
You've managed to retain a lot of the old character of the house, Colin.
It's identical almost to whenever we lived in. It's very little is. It was very important to keep the house as original as we could possibly do.
Yeah.
Whenever we done a wee bit of work to the house and
Right.
for the year
So what
2000.
was it like growing up in here? I mean, it must have been fun for kids. You had all these half lofts and things like that as well.
It was good. It was good crack. It was used
Yeah.
to be in the morning, the first up, the best dressed and stuff like that there. So it was, but it was good. It was good with a big family living in the house.